Hi, everyone. I'm Akash, the CEO of Airtime, your fast lane to product validation. And I have Bryan Rill with me today. He is the mastermind behind the masterclass to teach user research skills to product managers and to anyone who's interested in that. I just want to do a quick audio and video check with the audience. Please give me a thumbs up in the chat or just write, I can hear you well, I can see you well, so we know that technology is not working against us. And once we have that, I see a few people already commenting. It's amazing to see everyone here. The numbers are still growing and people joining. So the setup is simple. It's going to be a 1-hour session. It's going to be a bit awkward for me because I typically do much of the talking besides my guest, but today I'm not the host here. It's going to be Bryan. So without further ado, Bryan, let me hand over the mic to you and let's kick off the first module.
Thanks. Well, thank you so much, first of all, for inviting me to help lead this series. It means a lot to me to be able to do this for the community. I've spent a great amount of time over the last several years working with product managers who are attempting to do research. And so all of the lessons that I have to share come from really direct experience and trying to figure out what works and what doesn't work for people who may or may not necessarily be trained in research. So a big part of the scope of this is it's meant for people that don't necessarily have a background in research or looking for some of the fundamentals. And for those of you that do have experience with research, great. This might be a refresher to you. You might find some humor in a few of the stories I'll tell today. And we'll go from there. And the other thing I really want to do is I want to enable everyone with tools to move forward. So we have 2 extra resources beyond the session today. One will be a Slack channel that we've set up where you can communicate with Akash or myself anytime and ask questions. We're here to help. And also we're going to be sharing a Google folder that has a few really short and easy to use resources that I kind of keep in my toolkit at all times. And I often share these with clients. And so I'm going to share these with you for each of the modules that we do. So we'll have a set of resources for today and then the next 3 sessions as well. So with that, if we could shift over to the slides, I'll get going. Okay, so the question today is, who's my customer? Now that might sound a little silly, but I have found over the years that more often than not, people don't know their customers as well as they think that they do. So there's a few tips here to help you figure that out. And here's the outline for today. As we go through these topics, I have a few short exercises that will kind of test your knowledge and also help you do some good research. And then, as I said before, there are some resources that help you with each of these processes in that Google folder. So I just want to start with a couple statistics, right? And these are a little bit dated, but the numbers are even stronger now that show that customer experience is really, really important for the success of businesses. This is dated, between 2015 and 2020, and it basically shows that the customer experience is the most important thing in understanding if people are going to adopt and stay with your product. If we look at another study, you can see that bad experiences, whether it's with the product or the sales or the support team or anything else, lead for people to leave. And most of the time they do that without saying a word, which makes it very difficult to understand exactly what's causing churn. And the key number to look at here is that it's 6 to 7 times more expensive to attract new customers than it is to keep the ones you have. So what this means is there's a really strong argument for having a good UX and a good CX, right? The user experience of the product and the customer experience of your overall company. And as product managers, this is definitely in your wheelhouse. So this brings us to the very first exercise of the day. I want you to take 5 minutes and write down everything that you think you know about your primary target user. Okay. And then also try if you know the information to answer this, right? How do you know that? Right? Where did you get that information from? And you'll notice this exercise is called assumption personas because one of the things we want to tease out here is how much of what you're going to write is an assumption and how much of it is based on evidence. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to work on this. I'm going to talk and give a story as an example here, and maybe a couple extra tips about what to try to write down. If you just need to concentrate, though, feel free to mute me for a few minutes so that you can just think and write. So let's go with this. It's 9:05. We'll come back at 9:10. That's Pacific time, I have to say. All right, so my funny story is this. I was doing research for a company where we were building software for waste management called Haulers here in America. And we went out and we did about a week and a half of field work where we actually went on site to people and we studied customer success managers and everybody else that works around that system. And if you were building a piece of software for a customer success manager and you didn't do the field work, you're going to, look up some information, maybe some CSRs, and you can write down fairly accurate information. But there's things that you learn in the field that you can't possibly make assumptions about. And for us, some of the most interesting things was the desk of the CSR, right? We would look at this and everywhere we went, the desk was the same. It was a big, huge desk and it was absolutely covered in stuff. Some of it was sticky notes, some of it was Excel sheets, some of it was multiple phones, walkie-talkies so they could talk to the drivers, you name it. And it really taught us a lot about the context of use that we would have never known had we not looked in person. And part of that context was the fact that these people were being interrupted all the time. Now, why might that matter for product development? Well, if you build a piece of software that you have a screen open, let's say to enter a customer record, and you have to close or save that screen before you can open another customer record, you create a tremendous amount of friction in the workspace. And what we saw in these environments was that the CSRs were writing things down on pieces of paper when they had to take another call. And then they would reopen the customer record that they were working on before and enter that information. And the simple solution was to have multiple tabs, right, in the software. So you could have lots of customer records open, and maybe these records auto-save every 30 seconds or so. But we would not have known to build those features into the platform had we not gone and had we not looked at that person's desk and had we not understood how the world around them operates. So these are some of the details that are important to include in a persona. It's not just who they are, what their motivations and goals are, what their pain points and frictions are. Those are the standards of a persona. Okay, it's what's their life like? What do they surround themselves with? What gets in the way of them meeting their goals? So as you write down these aspects of your target user, try to expand beyond just their motivations and goals around your particular product use to thinking about what is their everyday life like and capture that. All right, so we have about a minute left with this exercise, and then we'll carry on. Kritika, your question I can see in the chat. PMF is product market fit. It's kind of the holy grail for young companies. It is that inflection point between growth and scale, right? When you have established a company, you have a product in the market, and you're starting to see a lot of positive movement. All right. So I'm going to come back to looking at what you wrote down in a little while. But before I do that, I want to talk about why we do research. And really, it's to design the next thing, whatever that thing is, with confidence. People ask me what I do with my agency, and I say a lot of times my outcomes are clarity and confidence, right? That you know that you're building the right thing and that you know you're building it in the right way. So research helps us with the first half of that scenario. Okay, and we can see this when we look at the double diamond, right? Design research in particular, the stuff that researchers and product managers are responsible for, is focused on finding the right problem and then finding the right solution. Those are our two major objectives. Okay, and if you zoom in on that left diamond, this is a diagram that I had found online that I really liked that kind of broke down what does designing the right thing or finding the right problem actually means in terms of process. Right. And it really is about this divergence and convergence that happens in the discovery phase. And you begin by exploring the problem or the opportunity. You're either meeting someone's need or maybe you're creating an altogether new one. Now, if you know it already, it's great here to capture the job to be done. This is a framework that basically restructures user need stories into talking about what are people trying to accomplish. Now, paying attention to the fact that how they accomplish it is usually immaterial. People just want to get things done. So I like to write user need stories from that perspective, saying, what do people want to accomplish? Okay. And that is the starting point of my inquiry. I want to figure that out when I do discovery. Another really important lesson I've learned over the years is that what people tell you the problem is may or may not be the actual problem. Okay, when people have a problem, they complain. And if they think they know what the solution is, they usually are referring to a solution that they experience with another product or service. So I might say, you know, I really like Zoom's new, auto summarize AI feature. Great, that works great for me at Zoom. So maybe we need to bring this into my product. Okay. Well, that sounds great, but that's a surface solution for a surface understanding of the problem. And when we do discovery research, we want to dig deeper. If you've ever heard of it, one of the techniques is called root cause analysis. And what that means is we're trying to look below the surface. We're trying to look below all the different symptoms we hear and say, is there a deeper, more fundamental problem that we can solve? And usually one fundamental problem has multiple symptoms. So if you solve the root problem, you actually solve a whole host of issues that you're dealing with. Ultimately, what we're trying to reach is a point of view. Now, many, many times I've asked people for their point of view and they give me a solution, but that's not what a point of view is. A point of view is a concise statement of a problem or an opportunity. And it is a combination of an understanding of people, their needs, and any other insights that you discover in research that help contextualize that understanding. Okay. Point of view is great because it's essentially the compass moving forward. Once you have a very, very, very clear problem to solve, then it generates a lot of creative inspiration to solve it. So a lot of the discovery work that we do is about getting to this point of view, which leads us to our next exercise. So what I'd like you to do is think about the problems that your customers face, and just kind of write down a list of the key problems and what you think are the surface issues and maybe what potentially are the fundamental root causes of those. Okay. And then of those, write down which is the most important problem to be solved. In other words, which one, by solving it, will actually solve and resolve the most amount of symptoms. Or which one of these problems is most important to your business financially for you to solve? And then explain why. So again, we'll take about 4 minutes or so for this exercise, and then we'll carry on. And here, Akos, I was going to ask if you have a perspective that you would like to add to the conversation.
Good question. I was also going mentally through your questions and answering them for airtime.
Mm-hmm. All right. So do you want to share what you think one of your biggest problems is?
Yeah. So I think what or maybe a little anecdote I can share. Like yesterday I ran an analysis on our customer base, and what I did was I looked at all the customers and I did some research to find out what funding stage they were in.
Mhm.
And then I did my best to assign the problem that I think brought them to Airtime. Because with many of our customers, I have like either an onboarding call or some sort of an interaction that gives me an insight on why they decided to join us. And what I found interesting, though, it's sort of retrospectively, it's something to expected, but like there's like very specific problems that pre-seed stage companies have, and what they're like looking a solution for. And very different ones that are, let's say, Series B or even profitable profitable companies. And it's just to reflect on the point here that like every customer type that you have will have a different set of problems, right? And every segment that you're working with, and you need to have a solution for. Well, you either focus on one initially, but then oops. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Okay. Yeah. I just seemed frozen for a second. So I just did this exercise for various types of user segment, and not just a single group. And it was pretty insightful for me. And I'm very curious what all the participants here and the audience members will come up with right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and another kind of anecdotal story that I think helps figure out root causes, it comes from my training as an anthropologist. One of my mentors said that, when we go out and we go into another culture and we ask people to explain why they do the things they do, they give us what are called secondary explanations, right? Those are what they think are the reasons for their activities. And they may or may not get it right. But then when you go into another culture, you notice a lot of kind of things that seem strange or random at first. And it's very important to take note of these things, because that means that there's something going on that points to a primary cause for human behavior. And if you spend enough time kind of connecting the dots, you'll figure that out, and it'll explain a whole lot of things. And my favorite example comes from Japan. So if you go to Japan, you'll notice some behaviors that might seem odd to you, maybe not. Taking off the shoes before entering the house, being quiet on the trains, being very apologetic in public spaces. And those might seem to be very disparate things. But if you look at the Constitution of Japan, one of the social pillars of Japanese society is to preserve harmony. I mean, it is literally written into their constitution. So it's a pretty deeply held cultural value. And that explains all three of those things, right? You don't want to track people dirt, hitogami, into people's house, right? That's why you take your shoes off. You don't want to offend people in a public environment. You don't want to disrupt the relative harmony of public society. And so that is kind of what we're doing when we're trying to do root cause analysis, is we're looking at a bunch of different things that happen in our product or service experience. And we're trying to connect the dots to see, is there something underneath these that helps us understand all of these things at once? I think that's a great segue to moving on. So how do we get this information? Okay, that's really the crux of today's session. And I call it discovery, right? It's really an active exploration. What we're trying to do is we're trying to understand people, their patterns, their needs, anything that will affect whether they'll adopt and how they'll use our product. So we need to observe how people actually exist in the world. We need to listen to them, both to existing and potential customers. We need to look at the market and any other key data points that give us this information. And discovery is a long and sometimes tedious process, but it really can drive strategy, both incrementally and in terms of strategic innovations, which are kind of breakthroughs, by identifying both problems and opportunities. Now, this slide is a really great illustration of the different dimensions of a person's experience that you can pay attention to. So a single transaction, like this woman using a movie kiosk inside a store, okay, can end up being pages of notes, right? Because you can look at what's happening, the device she's using, how she's interacting, when it's happening, what she's seeing, what she's feeling, what she's hearing, what she's thinking, what the context does to her interaction. All of these are different things that you can write down. And you never know what's important. So the rule of thumb is when you're going out and doing field observations is write down and capture as much as possible. You can figure out what part of it is important later. Now, that's a lot of information. So kind of one of the little strategic tips I've given people over the years is, well, if you don't want to write down everything, think about what you're trying to learn before you go out in the field and write down like just 1 to maybe 3 focal points that you want to tune into, and then take notes on those. And that will really greatly reduce the amount of information that you have to sort through later. Now, I think about it as 4 pieces when we go out and we do research in the world. One is being in context, right? So going out to where something is happening and watching it. Okay, there's nothing as valuable sometimes as just watching human beings do what they do. You're going to learn a lot from that. Okay, but you also need to complement that by having conversations with people. So ask people what they're doing, why they're doing it, if they're having any struggles, right? If they have any ideas, right? And it's the combination of observations and interviews that really gets you the richest data from field work. Of course, then you have to go back and you have to interpret all that, right? You need to organize this information, whether you have like a war room with a wall and a bunch of stuff posted over it, or you're doing this virtually with a Miro board or FigJam board these days, right? You want to collate all of your information into one place, analyze, and figure out what it means. And then finally, you also want to challenge the assumptions that you come into the field with. So another really important technique is to take some time to figure out, what are you assuming? And we're going to talk a lot more about assumptions and testing those in our next session. But at all stages of research and product development, we all have assumptions. And most of these we just hold as true. But are they? Right? So if you know what they are, then it makes it easier for you to go out and find out information to either validate or invalidate those assumptions. And I've given you a couple of resources in the Google folder specifically for this step. One is called the Field Guide, and the other is called the Mixtape Understand. So one comes from the D School, and one comes from a design ethnography company in Finland, I believe. And they're great, like little short guides, where normally the same set of techniques is taught in like, a few 100-page books. I love the short guides that are no more than 5 pages, and they give you prompts and steps to follow. So those are 2 of the resources that will help you in this space. And of course, if you need a little bit more information or some help executing on these, that's when you reach out to Akos or myself in the Slack channel. Now, my favorite model in the entire world is called the Master Apprentice model. So how many of you in this audience know what this picture is from? I'm dating myself here. Even Akos doesn't know. This is the Karate Kid, right? It's a really famous movie from my youth that they remade, but the original is still the best. Okay. And it is a great, what he's doing here is the young pupil is turning to the master and saying, can you show me how you do this move? Right. And that essentially is the master apprentice model, right? When you go to someone in the world and you say, can you show me how you do this? How many times have you ever been asked that in your life? Me? Like never. Because when I think my wife asked me once, and when I actually answered her, she was like, okay, I'm never doing that again. Right? But the point is you walk up, for example, when we did this, when we were out studying customer service representatives for the waste industry, these people had never been asked this question in their life. Nobody cared about the workflow or the pains that they experience or their ideas about how to make it better. So when you just sit down and you humbly ask someone to show you how they do their job, usually they will open up and they will share a tremendous amount of information. So that's part of the reason why the Master Apprentice model works so well, is it's an act of open, humble inquiry, and people respond very positively to that. Now, of course, you need to be authentic, right? This is not a sales thing. You don't walk in and you're trying to sell anybody anything. In fact, I tell people when I do field work with my clients, I say, you're not allowed to mention your product when we do discovery, not even once. And we actually had a jar. It was like, you talk about the product, it's $1, right? I had collected quite a bit of money by the end of that field trip, by the way, which we used on drinks afterwards. But the point was it takes training not to talk about your baby. And for those of you that are product managers in here, that is especially difficult for you. But just practice, just be humble. It's not about you, it's about them. And it really works when you do it that way. It's not a complicated technique, but there are a lot of really powerful psychological reasons for why it works. And those are listed on the slide. But really, one of the most important things is that people don't normally stop their activities to think about it. A lot of behavior is just unconscious and automatic. But when you put people in the give me the guided tour model, show me how you do things, then they do stop and they do think. And a lot of times they come up with their own insights right on the spot. So when I do this field work, it's usually me sitting down by someone next to them at their desk, if it's talking about software, or watching them with a physical product. And I ask permission ahead of time and I say, can I use my phone to take some pictures? I'm not going to take any pictures of you. I'm very sensitive about protecting people's privacy. So I'll take pictures of what they're doing and I might get their hands involved in it, but that's about it. Right. And they respect that I'm giving them. Okay. So I take a whole bunch of pictures. If they're going to show me a process, I ask them sometimes if I can turn on the video on my phone and they narrate what's going on. Right. So I get pictures, I get video, I have conversations with them. Okay. But I basically let them run the show. And then I just ask a bunch of probing questions. And that's how I get just massive amounts of data. We came back from that week or so trip with over 100 hours worth of video and audio that we had to process. And it led to the next year's worth of product decisions. 1 week of field work, all using the master apprentice model. Now, a couple other tips about this technique. One is to probe. Anything that is unexpected, anything that surprises you, make sure you ask why or what's going on and just try to get under the hood of that thing, because that is an insight waiting to be discovered. Okay. Make sure you're looking for ways that people are doing things that are different than what you think they should be doing. Now, don't tell them, oh, you could do this better. That doesn't usually go very well. But you can find out. And if they do something different, again, ask them why. One of the things that we learned when we were in the field was that it was actually more efficient for people to write things down on paper and then transfer it into another software system than to try to export it and import it. And so they had chosen a manual workaround simply because it was faster. It doesn't always have to be the solution you envision. People will go for what works, even if we feel as designers and managers that our idea could work so much better. We need to understand how they do things. And then, once you've gathered all of this information, you sit down with the team that you're working with. You talk about what you've learned. Maybe you have a piece of research software that will help you analyze it, and we'll talk more about that later. And then you come up with hypotheses that explain human behavior and also provide evidence behind your understanding of their needs or the opportunity. So that's a crash course in discovery. And where I'd like to move things next is into what you do with that information. Like, what do you create out of all of this? Well, first, you have to ask some questions, right? I get asked a lot of times when I'm training product managers and research, how do you do synthesis? And so this and the next slide are some tips to help you with that process of synthesis. Okay. The first tip, and probably the most important tip, is to pay attention not just to what people say they do, but what they actually do. And the reason why is these are often different. Okay. I have seen it over and over again in field research and in usability testing, a polar divide between people's understandings of their own behaviors and what they're actually doing. And there's a lot of cognitive science behind that I'm not going to burden you with today, but just trust me, they're different. And so you need to pay attention to both. Okay, because there's what people are actually doing in the world, and then there's the modeling of that and the storytelling they do around that. And both of those things are really valuable. Okay. Look very carefully at what tools are being used. Okay. Those tools are all there for a reason. It's your job to make sure you understand what that reason is. And that way, you know what your system has to do especially if you're trying to replace a system that people are already using. You have to do at very least what their tools are doing for them. Okay. And then finally, remember that human behavior is unconscious. I do not have to think about how to pick up a pen to do it. So if you ask me, how do I pick up a pen? I might actually struggle to talk about the mechanics of it. People that have a job that they've been doing for a long time don't have to think about how they do their job. They just do it. And it can make them very uncomfortable to actually ask them to unpack how they do it. So what people will tend to do, and this is a point I'll be coming back to over and over again, is they just make up stories. They're either just trying to get out of the situation quickly, or they're trying to appease you, or they're telling you what they think is the truth. And it may not be because of the way our cognition weaves stories together, right? So you have to get past those explanations. And that's why observation is so important. Or you have to triangulate, where you talk to a bunch of different people and you kind of see that primary explanation for their behavior through triangulation. And then finally, you can talk to people that are key informants, people that have a tremendous amount of domain knowledge around the subject and the people that you're working with, and they can speak to other people's behavior because they are experts in that field. I love this quote from Steve Jobs. Some people think that Steve Jobs was just this pioneering innovator who never did research and charged forward. Well, those people are wrong. He cared. He felt that we needed to understand people. Okay. And we do. We need to try to understand people better than they understand themselves. Now, how in the world do you do that? Right? Because when you just talk to people, all you get is how they understand themselves. Right? So you have to penetrate through that by gathering large amounts of data, right, that get you past the behaviors of any one individual, and by understanding human psychology and how social and cultural factors shape behavior and context. And each one of you is a master or will become a master in the domain of your product or service. And so it's your responsibility to really look at the broader issues that shape human behavior within the context of that product or service. And then you use that knowledge to then help you interpret the conversations and the observations that you're making. Now, another fun technique is called the 5 whys. This comes from Toyota, actually in Japan, created this method, and it's a root cause analysis, right? So if someone explains something to you or states a problem, you could just say, well, why is that a problem? And they'll give you an answer. And you say, well, why is that true? And then they'll give you another answer. And you might use the word how in here. So another technique is called why-how laddering. How does that make sense? Or how does that work? And then they'll say something else and you ask why. And generally the rule of thumb is if you can ask why 5 times, you get to the root cause. Why-how laddering is a very, very similar technique that does the same thing, right? It's the idea of having a conversation that helps people think backwards from what they've said to you all the way down to why they feel that way in the first place. It's kind of like therapy, actually, but just around problems that people are experiencing. Never thought about that way. Finally, it's important to pay attention to context. So who else is in the environment that impacts product or service experiences, right? Let's say that you have this lovely piece of software and it's used by middle managers in a business, and you envision them using this in a nice, peaceful office. But the lived reality of that is they have a manager that comes in and storms and demands things of them and drags them out of their office every 20 minutes. Okay. What's their experience of your product going to be like? Right? Like if they actually wrote a support ticket right after their mean manager came in, what do you think the nature of that support ticket might be? Right? It's going to be frustration. And the frustration is not at you. The frustration is just they're frustrated because of their situation. And then they run into some small problem and they need to vent. Right? So if they had been having a good day, maybe it wouldn't have been a problem in the first place. Right? So we need to think about that environment in which they're using it. We need to think about not just what is happening, but what could happen. Right? There's lots of examples of children's toys that seem fun, and then nobody thought through what could happen, and those toys end up getting recalled because they hurt someone. Also, think about what signs and symbols influence the user. So going back to my fieldwork example, we were in Kentucky and West Virginia. And one of the things that I found very, very prominent was the presence of religious symbols and quotes and things on everybody's desk. And so I asked about it. I said, why do you have these here? And the answer was sometimes funny, but one of my favorites was, Jesus is the only reason I can still do this job because he teaches me to forgive other people. And I thought that was fantastic because it really revealed a part of the psychology of that person's experience. And everybody surrounds themselves by things that influence them. What are those influences? What does it do for them or against them? Right? It's important for us to look at context whenever possible. And that brings us to exercise 3 of 4 today. Okay. I'd like you to take a few minutes now, reflect on what I've just shared with you, and think about, what do you need to learn about your customer and how are you going to go learn it? Look back at the notes from the very first exercise where you wrote down what you knew about your customer and ask yourselves, what are the gaps? What do we not know? Maybe you know a lot about your customers from digital interactions, but you know nothing about the context of use. Great. That's a research objective. Maybe you know a lot about your primary persona, but your product is expanding and you're going to have new people that you're designing for. What do you know about them? Are you relying upon the marketing team's personas? Because if you are, that's not a good idea. Marketing personas help the sales team sell a product. That doesn't mean that those personas are the best personas for understanding how people might use a product. I'm looking at the comments here, and these are some great questions. Russell puts, I need to know what's going on at different stages of product use. Russell, we are going to address that in multiple of the sessions. How do you take your persona and then find out they're using the product at each stage? Ooh, good question. Well, let's say that your persona is an IT admin, okay? It's pretty easy to see that they're using the product because they're the primary users of it. Now, if you have a piece of software that has multiple possible personas using it, you can look at usage analytics, for example, and one of the things you can do is see that different clusters of people use the product differently, and then you can look those customers up in your blanking on the name, your customer records, and you can see does that set of customers match a particular persona? Okay. Often they will. And if you can't draw those connections between the analytics of your product and then look at customer records to see the profiles of those people, then that's actually a great opportunity to do a micro survey. Airtime is a fantastic platform for intercepts like this, where when you see people using the product at a particular stage and you want to make an inquiry, you can pop up a survey in their experience and you can ask them a question that will help you identify which persona they are. So you can ask them to rate their experience. You can ask them what's the primary use case of your software. And a lot of times that will tell you the persona. Okay, so you use questions. You don't ask directly, hey, which type of user are you? You ask questions that ask about their usage patterns that would indicate what type of user they are. And sometimes you still don't have enough information from that. But if someone responds, you can always email them or call them or invite them to an interview where you can dig in and understand more about that particular user. And again, in-app feedback prompts are a fantastic way of gathering these people right at those moments that matter. I like this one from Aditya. How do you profile your customers if you have nothing in common with them? That's great. Because the thing is that if you are like your customers, that means you're biased automatically and you can't understand them objectively. So the more different your customers are from you, the easier it is to actually understand them as unique people or types of people. And the thing is you do your research. Your personas, which we're going to be talking about very shortly, should be based in evidence. Okay, I think we've had 5 minutes here. So if you guys drop some more of these questions into our Slack channel, I'll be happy to address them after the webinar. All right. So what do you do with the information? Well, the thing is now it's time to tell stories. Storytelling is one of the most powerful things that we can do in business. For those of you that are working in companies that are trying to get funding, storytelling is the way you do it, right? You've got to be a great storyteller. And storytelling works so well because all humans love stories. We've evolved to love stories. If you think about it, 99.9% of human existence, we didn't have writing. So how do we pass on knowledge? Well, we told stories. So for the vast majority of our existence as a species, we've used storytelling as a way of both transmitting and memorizing information, very important things. So if you learn to tell good stories, you are tapping into a natural human propensity. Okay, so when you tell stories, there's a few rules, right? The most important is you want to tell who, what, when, why, and how, right? Be very specific, be very descriptive. Don't just use generalizations. And if you are going to use generalizations, make sure that those are anchored in a body of evidence that supports them. So I mentioned we were going to talk about personas, and here we are. Okay. Bob is one of my favorite personas. His job is he's a professional soldier. He has received a lot of specialized training, but he really relies on his superiors to form decisions. And he's very familiar with technology, but he's not very proficient in it because he never hits his target. Okay. Now, all of that is pretty funny, but also pretty valuable information for a persona where we might be building a technical product for Bob, our stormtrooper, right? Maybe it's a new blaster. Maybe it's a new type of armor, right? This set of information helps us understand how Bob might or might not use our new piece of technology. So a persona is a fictional archetype, but it is an archetype that is based upon data from real people. So what we're doing is we are relying upon the human psychology ability to recognize archetypes in ourselves and in other people, and we're creating a series of these for our own product or service. Personas have a lot of benefits for the team, right? It helps us really be human-centered, building our product or service around people's goals and their needs. It helps us focus on a manageable set of people rather than trying to build for everyone. Anybody here that's tried to build a product for everyone has probably run into the issue of it's not good for anyone, right? So when we first create a product, it's very important that we create a product for a particular segment of society. Right? Now you might branch out from there, but in the beginning, every product needs to be focused. Okay? And personas help you create that focus. Personas help you make decisions in the product team, right? When you have a series of potential ideas to move forward with, one of the criteria that you can ask is, does it solve a need? Does it help resolve a problem for persona A or B? If the answer is no, it's out as an idea. Okay. And that's great for helping design teams sort out disagreements in terms of what to build. You can then evaluate your designs against the personas. When you go out and you do design validation, something that we're going to talk about in a couple sessions, it's very important to do those sessions with your existing or target audience because they are the ones that might be using it and they're going to give you the best feedback. Now, what do you put in a persona? This one of Rachel is what I consider an overly detailed persona. It has everything in the kitchen sink, but there's a lot of good elements here that I want to call out. One, it has a name and a descriptive title. It has a key quote, something that person would say, and not just what they would say anywhere, but something that they would say that is directly related to your product or service, right? Some key demographics about them, a photo to help personalize and create empathy with that user type, and a day in the life narrative. Now, I've seen a lot of personas that just use bullet points, and you can see that there are some on here. And bullet points are great, but it creates a lot more empathy for a person like Rachel or anybody else if you weave those key aspects of who they are into a story that helps you connect with them as a human being. And this goes back to the narrative mind, an aspect of our cognition. We like stories. So when we take data and we put it into the form of a story, it has much more impact than if we put it in the form of bullet points, even if it's the same information. Okay, I'm going to answer this question from Marianne. It said, recently I keep hearing that no demographics should be used in personas because they reinforce stereotypes. Instead, we should be thinking about the patterns that they share and getting their jobs done met or getting their intended outcome or purpose. Well, my take on this is include the information that's relevant to your product or service. So if there is some demographic information that will tell me something about how they're going to behave or use my product, then I want to include it. And one of them that I think is very important is age brackets, because a lot of the products and services I work on are digital, and levels of digital fluency differ between different age brackets. You know, boomers, Gen Xers, millennials, Gen Z, they each have their own usage patterns that are distinct from each other. So yeah, I don't need to know maybe the precise numerical age, but I need to know what kind of age demographic they're in. Okay. Their occupation, I think, is very important because that tells me a lot about who they are and what they have to do and their needs and such. Gender, maybe, maybe not. Sex, maybe, maybe not. Again, I ask myself when I'm collecting data for a persona, what do we need to know that actually influences the product or their experience with our company? And that's the type of information I'll include in a persona. I won't include a whole bunch of other stuff that's irrelevant to those questions. So I guess to answer you directly, Marianne, it's like sometimes and certain ones, but don't just have like a bucket list of demographics and always collect those every time, because you're right. Maybe they aren't necessarily useful, or maybe they are reinforcing stereotypes. Now, personas don't have to be incredibly complex, right? Simplified ones can be a very compelling tool. My rule of thumb is very straightforward. If a persona helps a team understand and empathize with the target audience, it is a success, period. Now, there are different levels of detail that you can add on top of that, but that's what it needs to do. If it just sits on a wall and nobody cares or looks at it, then it's not a good persona. Get rid of it. A good persona is one that people look at and they go, oh. Now, researchers often don't necessarily have to look at personas so much because researchers are always understanding the customer, so they just know. But you know who personas are super helpful for? The dev team, right? Which has very little contact with the actual end users. So it helps developers a lot to have a picture and an image of who they're building this thing for. And so a lot of times when I want to understand what the persona needs, I'll go talk to the engineers and say, what do you need to know? What do you think is going to influence product usage? And then I'm going to go out and I'm going to gather that information. Okay, the next artifact is an experience map. And I've got a couple of resources in the folder. One's called How to Build a Customer Journey Map That Works. It's an article, I think, off the UX Collective or Medium. And the other is a current journey mapping template, which I'll show you. And you can find templates like this in Miro or Mural, and maybe FigJam has it now. But these are ready-to-use templates that you can fill in. Now, experience maps, in my mind, are gold. A lot of people are used to just the marketing team using these or the customer success team. But I have to say that to me, in terms of doing discovery research, especially when we have existing customers around a product, these things are one of the most valuable assets that we can create. And the good news is that when you've gone out and you've done the discovery work that I've talked about in this session, you already have all the information you need to fill one of these in. If you have gone out and asked people to give you a guided tour and used the master apprentice model and studied them in their environment, or at least asked them about those things, you have all your data points. So you can just start filling it in with the information. These are essential for a few reasons. One is it identifies key touch points for the customer experience. I like to call these moments that matter. And at every moment, it matters both for the customer and for the business. And sometimes those are different reasons, but it's really good to capture what those moments are and to think about what it means for both the customer and the business. These also happen to be critical moments in which it's great to launch microsurveys, right? To gauge those moments throughout the user experience and to build a more holistic understanding of their experience rather than just an NPS survey once a year. Okay. For product teams in particular, these moments and the experiences around them help you identify areas where you can either improve existing features or create new ones for them. And it creates empathy in the product design and engineering teams by painting a clear picture of the lives that you're trying to change. Now, one little tip about these experience maps is when you're making one of these, don't just document how they're using your product or service. Think about the customer service representative in their desk and the fact that in their workflow, they might be using a piece of software that you developed, right? But they might also be using sticky notes, pen and paper, Excel, and 3 other forms of software. When you write out a customer journey, you want to capture all of that. Okay, and then as you're capturing that and you're diagramming the flow, essentially, then you identify what are the improvements and the key learnings. What are your opportunities to make a difference? This is a very basic, I think I made this in PowerPoint, template for thinking about how to put together an experience map. Okay, and essentially people go through stages of their day, and at each stage they have a series of things that you can capture. What they're doing, thinking, feeling, what they're saying, or any important quotes from discussions you've had with them, what issues are they facing, and then the insights and opportunities is where you think about what you learned and you draw those out for yourself. A lot of times this is a great opportunity to have a workshop with success and with support, get everybody in the room that talks to customers and do this together as a team, right? In a half day or a day, you can put together a customer journey map that will really add a lot of understanding to your people and their experience, both with your product and beyond. Once you make one of these, I like to put it on the wall and leave it there and update it every quarter or every 6 months. Aditya, yeah. The OG PowerPoint. Yeah, that's how we all start, right? And the Excel sheets, and then we find better tools. Okay, and this brings me to the final exercise of today. Okay, so we're close to end of time, so I'm gonna prompt you with this, and then I'm gonna move on to the last couple slides, and you can carry this one on your own. The exercise is to think about your customer goals, pick one of those jobs to be done, and illustrate their journey. Make your own customer journey map to the best of your ability. Identify what the key stages are and what are the touch points where you could make a difference. Okay, so that was the exercise, and that kind of leads into the challenge. Each of these sessions, I'm going to leave you with a challenge, right? And it's up to you whether you want to go out and do this challenge or not. You are free to reach out to me in the next 2 weeks while you're doing this challenge in the Slack channel and ask me for advice. I'll be happy to give you some tips. Okay. But essentially, the challenge is to go out and do a better job than we did in the exercises today, right? Go on a sensing journey to learn about your customers. Look, listen, and feel. Interpret their experience, identify the problems from their point of view, and then, evolve your persona. Create a customer journey map that's rooted in what you figure out from this sensing journey, as well as what you understand internally in your organization already. Now, the good news is if you accept this challenge and you go out there and you do it, you're going to know your customer better than they know themselves. You'll understand their most important needs, and you'll have better clarity on what problems you should be solving. I also have some homework for you. Now, we're here in the Airtime Academy, so it makes sense that we talk a little bit about Airtime at the end. It's a great research tool. I am very happy to be leveraging Airtime with some of my clients, and I'm looking forward to many more in the future. And what I'd like to do through the next few lessons is actually show you how to use Airtime to accomplish some of the goals that we're going to be talking about. So to prepare you for that, and we'll be using it next week, please visit their website. You can register for a free account. And then, if you've got the time, install it on the website so you can follow along and use it in your research. If you need help actually getting it configured, again, reach out to one of us. We could help you with that process. And if we get it set up on a real site or a sandbox or just even any site at all, you could use your own personal website just for the sake of learning how to use the tool. That'll really help out when we get to our next session where we're going to use Airtime to set up some, what I call listening posts around the customer experience. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for being here today. We will be meeting again to 2 weeks to cover the next unit, which again is about, really making sure you're solving the right problems. So we're going to talk about concept testing, right? That's the main methodology that we're going to cover in our next session. And then after that, we're going to talk about, once you actually have built prototypes, right? How do you test those, right? So design validation, usability testing will be the third module. And then the fourth and final module, we're going to talk about continuous discovery. And this really focuses on setting up these listening posts and a mature CX system for your organization so that you're always in touch with the voice of the customer. And that's a wrap. Those are the four things that I feel that product managers can have a direct role in, and will get you the evidence that you need to make informed decisions about the product. Because at the end of the day, that's all we're trying to do, is make the best possible decision. So this series of seminars hopefully will help you in that effort. And, if you need any further help with that within your company, please reach out, Rill Insights. I've got a great team. We're happy to help.